Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Ben Hunter, Booktopia's fiction category manager, and this is a show about books and the people who write them and read them and love them. And today I'm going to speak to Campbell Mattinson. He's a career writer, but this is his first debut of fiction, and I'm really excited to talk about his first novel. His 2006 biography of the winemaker Maurice O'Shea, The Wine Hunter, won numerous awards. And this debut novel is called We Were Not Men. It's a story of two twin brothers who grow up fast in the wake of a tragedy. Campbell, thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's been a long time coming.
A really long time. I adore this book. I think this is a really special moment. I've had a few of these where a lifetime writer makes their first appearance as a novelist. And the quality is just out of this world. And it sets my whole world on fire. My brain is just alight with love for this book, We Were Not Men. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but I want to know the whole story of how it came to be, because your publisher told me that it was a 30-year journey.
It was indeed. In fact, it's easy for me to date when I started, because I started the week that I heard that somebody that was important to me died, and so I actually recently Googled to see exactly when that was, and it was January 1990. So that is
before I was born.
Wow, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, it puts it in perspective that I started writing it 10 years before my son was born. And he's now in third year uni.
Wow.
So yes, it has been a long time. And in terms of like a lot of time has obviously passed, but in terms of that genesis, that person who was important to me who died, and I just had a kind of outpouring onto the page as a result of that. I just had this overwhelming feeling, apart from wanting to write, but this overwhelming feeling that he had died in tragic circumstances, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one. But this feeling that I wanted to do something for him, or you just wished you could have done something for him, and I couldn't. But this was my something, and he was a twin who died in an accident on the river, and my book, or my story, which is not his story. I didn't try and write his story, but mine is about twins and a river. So it clearly the launching place was both the emotion of the moment and kind of just inspired by those basic details.
And so that initial burst of writing, that spawned the prize-winning short story, is that correct?
Yeah, look, unbelievably, given where we are, but it actually spawned a 160,000 word novel, which was never sent out, and it then was distilled to a 3,000 word story, which won a pretty major award, and then we tried to build it back up. And that was a long process.
You're never going to let it go. And now we have this novel, We Were Not Men, two brothers, a river, a tragedy, and growing up well too fast. Tell me about John and Eden.
Yeah, look, I just, I guess, the tragedy involves in the novel involves the death of their parents, and the first time they jump into the creek at the back of the property there to live on, I guess they just feel closer to their mother. There's something about jumping into the water that makes them feel closer to their mother. And naturally, as they miss her, or as they have this massive hole in their life, they become addicted to jumping into that water. And they jump into that water so often that they become really good at swimming and develop ambitions as swimmers. But I love the fact that, yes, they do have kind of, straight ahead ambitions, but it's driven by this enormous emotion.
Yes, and it's a beautiful story of brotherhood. I have brothers, and I grew up with all of the angst and anxiety and shame and everything that comes with being a male, particularly a male with brothers. And you distill that in this book. I'm going to use your verb, distill, to a T. And I think in that competitive world of professional swimming, which they end up, that really comes to the fore, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple of things at play that come directly out of me. I was kind of the sensitive, bookish kid who was also a jock.
Right.
I was kind of both, and I also had a brother who I constantly needed his approval, and I have a somewhat difficult relationship with my brother, but I grew up just desperate to be as good as him.
Yeah, me too. For my brother.
And I feel like the narrator in this that brotherly relationship is that bit more claustrophobic because they're twins, but one of the twins is desperate for the other's approval the whole time, and it's only as the reader that you can kind of see that. I don't think the narrator sees it, but
Yeah.
I think that the reader sees that the other twin's desperate for his approval too, and the tragedy of them and of us and people is that we don't see that the other people are trying, or the other people are feeling similar things to us.
Yeah, you nailed that. And yeah, it's right to laugh because in spite of the horror that comes into this book right from the start, which will get the reader to tears, there's a lot of humour here. And there's an incredible character that we need to talk about, and her name is Bobby. Can you tell us about Bobby?
Yes, well, Bobby, who I'm tempted to use the phrase love-hate because she's the reason the book took 30 years.
30 years well spent.
Just in terms of she makes or breaks the novel. It's a story about two boys and their ambitions and their need to fill this hole in their life, and it's very heavy, potentially heavy subject matter. And it's not that Bobby, who's their grandmother who is to look after them, it's not like she sees herself as a laugh a minute. She's not the light relief in her mind, but she does happen to say a lot of things that are funny. And
Yes.
she definitely gives the book humour. And I've been really, I felt like, if you looked through my notes particularly over the last 10 years, and a lot of my notes just involve me emailing myself.
Right.
But if you look through those notes, I'd say they're 99% Bobby.
Wow.
She is just the driver. In fact, it might even be 100. She's the absolute driver of everything. And I think that as soon as I kind of became aware, like that initial outpouring, I had the story, I had the boy characters, and that was all great. And then I just went, this Bobby character, this grandmother character needs to be a lot stronger. And it just took me a long time to really get her moving and get her speaking. But once she spoke, I couldn't shut her up. And so she's always just saying things, and she still kind of talks to me. I still kind of hear things and go, or I think things and I go, I wish I'd put that in because that's Bobby talking, that's not me. And I just think that she makes it, she adds more than one layer to the story, but she just makes it richer.
The tragedy at the outset of the novel, the death of the parents, it's a cataclysm and it's a shock. And one thing you capture really well is the silence that puts everyone into. There's a lot of sparsity in this book. I've had a few people in the office reading it since I've been raving about it, and they've come back to me going, "Oh, it's really sad." And I was a bit jarred at the start by how quiet this novel is. And I said, "Yeah, you're right, but that's that's what a shock death is. It is this grave silence that just falls over your life, and then you slowly build it into anger and love and all the emotions that come, and in your case, swimming. But tell me about the sparsity. Tell me about writing a book of vignettes and the episodic nature of this novel.
Yeah, look, I'd say that my natural writing style is to write in scenes, even in non-fiction. That said, this book over the years developed its own style, almost its own writing style, to the point where I notice just little things. Just when I'm typing, I'd notice, I'd spell some words out rather than abbreviate them, which I would normally do and which I still do. I just don't when I'm writing that book. It just developed its own kind of pace and its own, there's pace in a storyline sense, but there's also pace, obviously, in the tension between words, or, is it breathless? Is it skittish? Are the words landing on the page slowly? And I became obsessed with that through the writing of this book. And the phrase that kept going through me, and I guess there's so many moments in this book that felt to me to be quite exquisite, and so that the writing to me became like fly fishing. I was just repeatedly trying to land that perfect word, that perfect thing. That's it.
Yes.
And so, and I think that not all writing is fly fishing. Some write that, fishing's not a bad analogy in terms of, some writing is
deep sea trawling,
and some is spinning, but this became a really just landing those moments.
Yes, and this is something I find when I read journalists who dabble in fiction, is that they know how to do brevity and they know how to do economy. And when you times that by 30 years of time and effort, you end up with this.
Well, yes and no, I hope it's a tight novel, and that was definitely the intent. That said, as I say, there was an initial, and it's almost of no consequence, but there was an initial novel that was over 160,000 words. But even if we fast forward to 18 months ago, this was a 130,000 word novel, and it's now in print as a 100,000 word novel. So 30,000 words taken out, largely by, some of which is the editing process, but the vast bulk of them was me taking them out. So it was quite important to me that it was tight.
Pure.
Yeah. I mean, I've always, my thing is a kind of raw, honest style, and you need to be tight to really nail that.
Yeah, you were just signing some books, and we were talking about Raymond Carver. And I think that's an obvious influence when I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was the master of the quiet moments, or the master of the things left unsaid, but they're there. And I think there's an element of that in this book. I mean, and there's probably a few scenes in this book where it's not just an affectation of the writer, the whole scene comes down to one word, to the point where people who've read the book come and mention that word. And I think that's quite unusual, and it wasn't necessarily something I orchestrated or tried to do, it just happened, but it was a nice thing to happen.
The person you knew who passed on in a tragedy died on a river. They were a sports person, but they were not a swimmer. So,
no, that's right.
And you were saying that it had to be water, but it changed sports a lot. I found that fascinating because having read it, I couldn't imagine it being anything else but swimming.
Yeah, that's right.
And you write swimming in a really evocative way that I've not experienced before. I'm not a swimmer myself, but I've read some really evocative and intense versions of swimming or fictional realizations of swimming. I'm thinking of Barracuda by Christos Chalkis. This is something completely different, though. What's your experience of the water, and how did you craft it in the way you have?
Yeah, before I get to that question, it's interesting you mentioned Barracuda, because I don't know when Barracuda came out, but it probably came out more than 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
But I've read, most of what Christos has written or published, but I've never read Barracuda because I didn't want to be seen to have copied it. So, and yet that at the time, because I was trying to write this book when that came out, and I was
right,
like,
and
oh,
you'd
no,
already
stolen my idea.
You'd sat on the
and
idea
yet
of your
now a long time ago.
right, and you were sitting on the idea of adolescent boys trying to get into professional swimming.
Yeah, well, look, I really don't know. I haven't read that book, so I don't know. But when I saw and I saw the cover, and I just went, "Oh no!"
Oh, no.
And but also, I didn't want to read it because I didn't want to be influenced by it, or put off by it. But yeah, I did try other fields of endeavour. It'd be fair to say, when you've got 30 years, you've got time to explore various avenues and in various ways. I just thought that sunlight and water were just so key to the book, and being in the water just worked well. And I've always seen books or my more creative writing in colours and textures and as I say, it just never felt as good when it wasn't swimming, or it wasn't in the water. And in fact, this is kind of unrelated, but a few years ago, I really turned around the writing this book and went, actually, this isn't just some thing that I'm playing around with every year for the last 25 years. I'm actually going to get this done. And the thing that turned me around was I developed an interest in photography, and that just obsesses you with light. And I actually think it's an interesting book to read from the perspective of just look at the light in the book. So yes, there's water, but look at the light. I'm always the book is always referring to where the light falls.
There you go. That's that interest in photography. That was one of the things that kind of got you over the end.
It helped me visualize the scenes. It's a funny thing to say, but once I started seeing where the light fell, it just made the writing of it easier. The other thing that happened is that, yes, I had all these scenes that I'd been trying to piece together for a long time. I got to the point, which was a pretty low emotional point, where I thought it was never going to happen, and should I give up? And I decided to start again. And so I'd been trying for a long time to stitch pieces together, and if I can get X to Y, then we're going to get, and it's a funny thing, given you've taken a long time and you might be perceived as a perfectionist, but I realised in some ways I'm looking for shortcuts.
Right.
Which seems like, how can you be looking for shortcuts when it's taking you 27 years? And once I had that realisation that, there's no shortcuts, it needs to be written fresh. And then that together with things like photography and various things, and it started to work.
Take the shape that it now has. What does it feel like to have it as a ink and paper bound book going to market into the hands of readers?
We're talking at a really interesting time, because it's not just, accepted by a publisher, printed, seen it, felt it, all those things, but we're a day or two from it actually going live. And that's a different feeling to what it was perhaps 3 months ago when I might have first felt the book.
Right.
I'm on the cusp of people actually reading it.
So the initial celebration has faded away, and now you've got the... have you got the fear?
It's just really weird. Well, not weird. And I've been saying that, yes, I'm nervous and stuff like that, but it's not really nerves. It's kind of this... as I say, it's a raw, honest book. It's a deliberately vulnerable book. And that's great in theory, but then when you go, hang on a minute, people are going to read what is, even though it's an absolutely fictional story, it's intensely personal. There's nothing held back. There's no, I can't say that. And so, that's an interesting feeling.
It is a super intimate book. And it's the story of boys coming of age and growing up fast in the light of a tragedy. But it's also the story of the grandmother, Bobby, who is also grieving and also has to fill in as guardian to these boys, these incredible boys. There's a lot of growing up that goes on in this book. Do you think you had to age yourself? Did you have to do some growing up yourself to get it to where it is?
Yeah, look, I absolutely did, but I think I became a bit interested along the way in this notion that, it's at various times in your life, you think to yourself, yeah, I know what I'm doing, or, maybe you've just turned 18 and you go, it's official, I'm an adult now. Well, but it's not just at 18, it's all various stages of your life. You think, yep, I didn't know then, but I know now. And then you get even older and you go, actually, I didn't know then either. And you make all these important decisions when you don't necessarily know what you're doing. And so, in short, I became really interested in the difference between getting older and growing up, actually growing up.
Yeah.
It's not just what your age says. And that kind of becomes, a really important thing in the book. But I think it was important for me too, that in order to write Bobby, there was no shortcut to Bobby. I needed to be, she's on the other side of youth. She says to the boys, at one stage early in the book, look, I know that, I just am what I am, and but life's different on the other side of youth. And I kind of feel like to realise the novel fully, I needed to be on the other side of youth too, in my mind, not just whatever the age on the birth certificate says.
What are you going to do now?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure, but in some ways, I've worked on this book every year for 30 years.
Yep.
But I haven't worked on it every day or every week for 30 years.
Yes.
There's been other things I've worked on, some of which have finished and some of which haven't. So there's other, and so yes, there's other things in the drawer, but there's also other things that I knew I'd get to. I just need to get this finished. So I might not have necessarily worked on them, but I've always had a certain list in my head. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, but this is the first, and so I really needed to get this done so that I can then move on. So yeah, there's other things I want to write, definitely.
Oh, I can't wait to have them. I'm going to ask one last question. I've spoken to a lot of authors about getting the work done and getting the work out there, and I've often gotten some version of, you'll always have to put a book away. We'll have to put a book to bed that's not going to come to be. A story that does not want to be finished, a story that does not want to be told, that will not work. And that's a really hard, grieving, terrible process to go through. And that's where a lot of people stop. You've finished this thing after all these years, and it's incredible. It's one of the best things I've read this year. What advice do you give to the people out there who, like you, are writing or writers, but are not yet authors, that they're not finished and they don't know where the finish line is?
Yeah, well, obviously it was never about this, but now that we are where we are, I feel like I feel like the book itself, whilst it's undeniably a book about love, it's hope that gets them up in the morning. And I feel like now that my own personal story in a way is a story that can provide hope for people, because it is the archetypal book in the bottom of the drawer that I can't get to work, that 99 times out of 100 or almost never ends up working and ends up in this position, and yet it did. And so there is hope for us all. And I think what I said earlier is actually the thing is that it's really, really hard to turn your back on years of work and start afresh. And that was what that was the decision that got us here.
I'm so glad we're here. Campbell, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been great.
You can buy We Were Not Men from booktopia.com.au. It's published by Fourth Estate.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.